A difficult but also unavoidable situation in this life is when we lose a loved one. The biological death ends up putting us apart from those that we love, at least apart temporarily. But could the out-of-body experience be a tool for us to eventually see them again? Is it possible? What are the conditions? Let's talk about this in a moment. Hello, this channel is about taking control of our personal evolution, both spiritually and in this lifetime. Hence this topic, because we want to understand about those who are in spirit between lives, but also the condition of those of us who are still here in this body, but we would like to know how life in this other dimension or other realm works. I want to focus specifically here about the out-of-body experience and how we can meet those that we knew in this life but who are no longer with us. But I want to say, first of all, that there are many different angles that we would need to understand in a condition like this. Angles that I do not have time to address all of them in one video, but the condition of those who passed away vary a lot depending on a number of things. How they passed away is only one of them. How they lived their life is only another of them, but not necessarily the most important. There are sometimes factors and elements that are more related to how much of wisdom the person had. What was the temperament? What was the strong or not so strong traits of personalities of that individual? These things tend to somehow affect more. In other words, you could say the maturity, the evolution of that individual or of that consciousness. This will influence. But in spite of that, of course, it's possible many times that we can meet them when we are projected outside of our bodies. We can does not mean it's easy, it always happens, or we will necessarily be able to. So we need to understand a little bit how it works so that we can do it in the best way, so we can have better chances of succeeding. There are three basic conditions in which this happens. The number one is when the individual who passed away comes to us. So somehow the connection is established by them. The second is when we, by ourselves, we go to them so they are not participating in that process of connection. And the third one is when both, in a way, they connect to each other so they meet and both participate in creating that energetic connection. If you allow me a parenthesis, there's something I would like to explain, because when we encounter someone here in the physical life, well, maybe you set a meeting, right? So let's meet by that cafe in the corner of this street with that street. Okay, then you have the time, you have the address, you show up, the other person is there, you meet. So you need a physical address, you need a reference of time that is a physical time. When we meet someone outside of our bodies, we do not have an address in the same sense. Actually, there's no way that we can pinpoint in terms of the multifold different dimensions or frequencies of existences in the non-physical world in which we can say, okay, we are going to meet in this address. This, as so far, with everything that has been studied, doesn't seem to be possible. Nonetheless, it's quite interesting because the GPS or the address that we use when we are not in the physical body is basically energy. Energy from our energy bodies, from our energy field. So somehow our emotions, our thoughts, and who we are expressed in those energies. And this establishes a connection. This energetic connection is responsible for so many different phenomena, including when we sense somebody thinking of us, but when we are affected by someone's thought or energy in a good way or in a bad way. And this someone can be someone physical or someone who do not have physical body, has already passed through the biological death perhaps, but are somehow interfering with us. Now, having said that, if energy is what connects us, so it's the reference that we have to meeting one another when we are in the non-physical dimension, of course, when we want to meet somebody that we knew in this lifetime but are no longer here, or is no longer here, what we are going to do is that we are going to think of the person. We are going to try to establish the connection, energetically speaking, with that person. This has lots of complexities. And I'm going to explain how it works so you will understand the complexity and what you should do and what sort of care you should take. This is something that we need some caution, not because it's dangerous that it would harm us, but because in terms of emotion, it can harm more the person who is in the non-physical dimension now than us, because we have our physical bodies. The life is still the same. For them, their lives are not the same. Please understand that those who are no longer in the physical bodies, they are alive. Life continues. We don't change just because we died. What we change is the scenery. Perhaps we change the vehicle. We are no longer in this dimension. We are no longer in this body, but we are alive. We have a life. So, for us, when we think of meeting someone who passed away and we loved and we have memories with them here, somehow we are just establishing a connection or wanting an experience that connects us to this life. So it's consistent, it's coherent to us here, to who we are. But when we try to connect to that non-physical consciousness, they may be in a moment in their lives there which is not consistent with reestablishing contact with their previous lives or with the physical dimension. I'll give you a few examples. Let's say that the person is still, let's say, missing very much someone he or she left behind. Or let's say they are worried about something. Or let's say that that consciousness is or was very possessive, very attached to certain things. Therefore, they were supposed to be living a life that is in a completely different world. Of course, it's our planet, it's our world, but it's no longer the physical life. However, they are still so connected with the physical life that resembles a little bit, when we move from one country to another or from one house to another. And even though we are in the new place, instead of living happily in that new place and establishing a productive life there, being connected to what's going on, we keep just thinking and reliving the past and letting the opportunity of the present go. So somehow, of course this is just an analogy, but somehow it's more or less the same in some cases. Therefore, when this is the condition of the person who is now in between lives, it's not so ideal that we force or we try too much to meet them, because when we do meet them in a condition like that, it may just revive so much their emotions that instead of moving on or allowing time to heal them, we say that time heals everything. For many cases, it is also the condition. I said many, I did not say all cases. So instead of allowing time to heal whatever there is to be healed, we go and we poke, we bring all of the emotions again. But I'm not saying that it's necessarily always bad. In some cases, it may be a closure. In some cases, it may be needed. So nothing that I say here can be taken 100%. So you need to pay attention to my words. Most of the cases, it is usually like that. The most common is this. So please use your discernment. If I want to meet, or let's say you would think, well, I want to meet my grandma. Okay, but how do you feel grandma is? Well, do you have any notion of what sort of environment she would be now in her new life with no physical body? Would be ideal that you had more or less an idea, or at least you would consider about that, because this will create a more positive energy connection between the two of you. You wouldn't just make the connection based on emotions and revolve in the past, but more based on let's see the future together, let's love each other in a way that is productive and positive. So this tone in the energy, this quality of the energy is quite important for you to establish that connection and make it positive for both. But in this case, the complexities, beside all of those that I have said, knowing the condition and having the right emotion, but also the complexity is how to reach that consciousness. Because in some cases, let's suppose one possibility, one example, that individual is already, for example, planning a new life, or is already very engaged in a certain activity in a dimension that is very far from this, and I'm talking about dimensional distance, not spatial distance, but is far in a way that they are, for example, in a more advanced non-physical dimension, a dimension or a level that is not connected to our physical world. Can we go there in an out-of-body experience? Absolutely. But you understand that the connection would have to be very strong to take you to a place that is not connected to you in this present moment. So the only connection would be you and grandma, for example, if you are trying to see or meet grandma. So that is one of the complexities. The other one is that sometimes the consciousness may also be in a dimension that it's not so well and not so balanced. Of course, this is not so common. It's not like, people are lost. No. But they may be in a condition in which they are not very lucid. They do not know exactly what's going on. They may not be aware, for example, that they are in between lives or who they were in the previous life. So again, when you try to connect, how can you establish that connection? How do you get the map? How do you get the condition of reaching that place? Of course, if we reach a place like that and we see that our loved one is a little confused or something, we need to know how to act, to help. We need to know what are the strategies, what are the techniques. There are techniques that we can apply. There are certain correct ways of approaching someone. It's like when, let's say, somebody who is a counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist, and they're dealing with individuals with certain characteristics. They know how to handle that. They have certain approach that they have developed, they have studied, that have been somehow learned in order to bring the best result from the situation. When we are outside the body, this also exists. So, can we understand how things work out there in the non-physical dimension without any level of, how could I say, imagination or anything? Let's examine it. Put lots of cases together and learn how to proceed. Yes, it's possible. Anyway, it's not for this video to teach about this, but to bring this to your mind, because if you consider meeting someone and if you are going to apply the technique, you need to know all of these details. If I would try to meet someone that passed away, let's say my mother, who passed away a few years ago, and I absolutely adore her, admire. She was my best friend. So most definitely I lost something that makes a lot of difference for me in this life. But I don't keep thinking of her. I move on and she's moving on. And I know eventually one day we are going to meet again. But if I am able to see her in an out-of-body experience in a productive way, in a way that happened for the good of both of us, and we are not prioritizing this on top of other things that are more important, I would love to. So that is a condition that we can sometimes try to seek to meet someone. If I were to do it, that's not something that I do at the moment at least, but if I were to do it, I wouldn't be thinking of that during my waking state or going to bed and say, I'm going to leave the body to do this and that. I normally think that is not the way it turns out to work better. And I'll tell you why. Because usually when we do this, we are not so perceptive of the, the climate, the characteristic of that energetic connection. So we are not so perceptive of how positive that encounter would be for both, of how much timely that would be. When we are, however, outside the body, and that's how I would do if I were to leave the body, and I am already out, lucid, conscious, in control, then I would put to myself as a target, hey, let's see if I can meet my mother. I would love to. But then at that moment, because we are more in connection with the subtle world, it's a little easier for us to be able to sense how the energies feel in doing that. A little bit easier to sense if that is a good moment for this, if that is even possible. And of course, it's much easier because I am already out there, so I would then eventually be able to go to her. If you try and meeting someone and you insist, and it's not happening, probably the person is so far in dimensional terms, or so disconnected, or somehow so immersed in a certain project. Can be so many different things: plan a future life, study something of their past, but probably they are so immersed into something that the connection is not being established. So usually in this case, it's better to say, okay, let me wait a little bit more. Let me do other things until the moment comes. So it does not mean you have to let go of the idea, but if you insist too much, you may be trying to force something to happen in a way that's not the best. And then one situation for us to consider here is that many times it gets confusing for us to understand if the person that we are meeting, either because we went to them or they came to us, gets a little bit confused because we do not know if it's actually them or if we are dreaming. So the more you do it in a natural way, the better it will be. You imagine that if you want too much and you insist too much, someone else may try to pretend to be grandma. And you will know it's not if your mind is calm, if you are observing what's going on. But if you are too emotional, too anxious, you may not notice. Or you may even dream of meeting grandma because you have been thinking so much of that, insisting so much. So you end up dreaming of that instead of actually having that encounter. So these are little details that if we can think of it and work with it, it works for the best. Now, a different condition, but also very consistent with what we were discussing, is when the energetic connection is established only by the non-physical person. Therefore, when we encounter that person that we used to know in this life, either when we are projected or when we feel their presence, let's say we are in our everyday life and we feel their presence, that connection was established only by them, not by us. There are certain characteristics there that I think it's important that we understand. Most of the things that we discussed in the first case also operates here, but in this case, we have to see what were the motives, what made that connection happen. If it is, for example, someone that passed away and is eventually there with us, or came for a moment just perhaps to share affection or just to help with something that is very timely, it's something very sporadic, that is natural. But when we notice the condition that there is somebody that was a relative or someone who is constantly present, keeps appearing a lot in our out-of-body experience, we have to observe what's going on. It may be a healthy, positive condition, but in many cases, if not in most cases, it is not. And I'll tell you why in most cases it's not, but again, not in all cases, because considering that the person moved on to a new life, it's very appropriate that they maintain their focus in that new life and not so much connected here. Therefore, when they come here and they establish that connection with us, we have to try and make of that the most positive condition so that we stay balanced and we keep focused on what is it that we have to do in this lifetime, and we help them or allow them to also stay focused and keep learning, keep being productive, keep being happy, but a fulfilling happiness, something that is more of a moment of life in which we are producing, we know what's going on, we have awareness, we have lucidity. This sense of lucidity is super important. The more lucid, somehow the more discernment, meaning the capacity to distinguish what is what in our lives, why certain situations happen or not. So that discernment, that lucidity, having that broad vision gives to the person that is no longer in physical body a degree of serenity, a degree of maybe peace internal peace so much that they are ready to support others. They are ready to let go of small things or emotions that were hurting them for small things when they were in the physical lives. Because the broad vision, seeing things from a big perspective, tell them what is more important in life and helps them also to see with themselves, their personality, who they are, what is more important. So we have to keep an eye on this. If you sense that there is someone close to you, or you meet someone that you think is a relative or someone you used to know that came to you, be sure to identify that that's really the person. Because sometimes we may be so anxious to meet someone that we may just end up assuming it is grandma when it's not necessarily grandma there. Use your ideas, use your sensitivity, trust yourself, but do not try to do self-suggestion or convince yourself. That is the best way, because there's so much we can sense, there's so much we can see, there's so much we can feel when we go places, we meet these people that we love. But if we keep doing self-suggestion, then it's hard for us to know what really happened and what was only in our mind. And then finally, as I told you, the third condition is when both establish the connection. Most of the time when this happens is because there is some sort of non-physical mentor, like someone that is not with a physical body, so someone also between lives, but who wants to support or to promote a good condition for the moving on of the person who is now in between lives, and also ours, who wants to somehow give us what we need, what's good for us, and give us a good moment. So most of the times these encounters happens because of their support. Now, in this case, many times we start thinking spontaneously of that person who passed away, almost as if somehow we already feel there's something going on, but also they start connecting with us. So I'll tell you a little story of mine, just to give an example. I think that helps to explain better than too many words that sometimes are not as clear as we would like. But there was a case in which I met a dear uncle of mine. Actually, those of you who saw my TEDx talk, you will see that I tell a story there that I saw him in an operation table when I was very, very young. Anyway, about 10 years after the moment that I tell you about in my TEDx talk, this uncle of mine passed away. And probably another 10 years later, after he passed away, at least 10 certainly, I met him outside the body. And the encounter was a surprise to me, because even though I liked him very much and I had so much connection with him and a bond of love, I didn't used to dream of him or think of him. Just life moved on, continued. But there was a moment, this was probably long ago, maybe 25 years ago, but I suddenly started almost like hearing, but was not hearing with my ears, like in my mind, the little whistle that he used to do, and when he would call me when I was a child. Actually, I was very young at the time. Maybe I was between 5 to 8 or 9. So he used to use that whistle like just to play with me. And all of a sudden, that's something I never thought of, I didn't even pay attention when I was young or when I was a child. But then all of a sudden I started hearing that in my mind, and I could feel the love that he had for me in that moment, the care that he had. To me, that was so important, because it was a realization. I think I never realized how much he cared. And at the same time, I noticed how important that was for me, and I never could know as much, and I never verbalized. When we are young, sometimes we just keep moving and we don't value certain things that later in life we start appreciating more. So I just remember of that and had that nice feeling. That was it. I didn't pay attention to that. However, same night, I had an out-of-body experience in which I encountered him during the experience. But my encounter was not here in this physical level of reality. I think was not, from everything that I could observe, in the place where he was at that time inhabiting. It was somewhere intermediate, almost as if he was thinking of me, made me remember of him and have that good feeling. And because of that strong energy connection happening from both sides, maybe if I haven't noticed, if I was not sensitive enough to notice, maybe that out-of-body experience wouldn't have happened. But because I connected and I also felt, and that was so strong and did not start from me, started from him, then I meet him, and I remember seeing him and being so surprised because, as I said, I was not used to even dreaming of him. And I hugged him. I could feel his non-physical body. I could feel his feelings, his energy, his thoughts. So it was so loving, so good moment, was so important for me that moment. But the emotion was to an extent that I ended up returning to my body and then immediately woke up in my body. But I knew I had encountered him. So that's an example of when both creates the connection. And I believe that was not just he thinking of me and me feeling or thinking of him, because the dimensional distance is so much that if we would pick the thoughts and energies of everyone in all dimensions that have connection with us, that would be such a complexity for us, even more complex than it already is to handle all the different types of energies and situations in life that we have now. But that's why I understand from my experience that was somehow supported by this non-physical mentor. Anyway, this is just an example, but I think the example illustrates and explains to you what I mean when the connection is from both sides. In this case, was extremely positive. I recognize the affection, the love, the emotion, and I could kind of thank him and he thanked me, and that was it, and we moved on. That is how a good connection outside the body should be. Maybe we have to communicate, tell stories, exchange a few things, but that represents growth, freedom, somehow liberation for both, and that is what counts. Or if we can meet someone and we are going to support and help, or if we will learn, but usually the encounters that are more productive, more healthy or healthier, with the non-physical consciousness that we used to know, usually they tend to be of a type that is brief, and not very often, and very remarkably positive to us. Any other cases should be studied and analyzed in the specific condition to see, that is an exception, or what is going on. Is this a positive condition? Is this really who I think it is that I am sensing? And what is causing this connection? Maybe it's positive, maybe it's healthy, maybe I have grandma supporting me in my life, but is this the real role that grandma should be doing? If yes, wow, wonderful, let's keep moving. If not, let me tell grandma, don't worry, life is hard, but I'll do my part, you do yours, don't stay stuck because of me. Anyway, something like that. So complex, isn't it? Relationships in this lifetime alone is already so complex. Imagine when we include all of the different dimensions and the connections and relationships and affection, but also maybe feeling bitter, feeling maybe resentful of others who are no longer with us. So complex. Anyway, the more we understand, the more tools we have to operate in this reality and maybe to improve the condition. That's why I wanted to share with you these few ideas here. I hope it was helpful. If you are interested and you are not subscribed, please consider subscribing. I am very glad that you were here with me up to now. Thank you very much for those who are here, and see you next video. Bye bye.